do a wonderful lamb and eggplant tagine recipe, and I'm going to teach you a little bit about braising using either a Dutch oven or a tagine, which is also a great tool to use in the kitchen. So we're starting out with about a pound of lamb. You can increase this to 2 pounds if you like, but this goes a long way. I actually have lamb shoulder with bone in, so you get lots more flavor doing that. And we're going to heat this up in the Dutch oven, but first I want to talk about the ingredients and the first step that we need to take to cook the eggplant and the tomato, and then start cooking the meat with all the spices. So we're going to work a little bit backwards, but it's all going to turn out great. So what we're using today are 2 eggplants, and they just get cut up into small cubes. And we'll do the same with the tomato. We have cilantro and parsley, fresh. I insist on the fresh in this recipe. Please do not use the dried. It just comes out so much tastier. We're using olive oil to heat the lamb, and a very special ingredient which adds flavor and color is saffron in water. So I've just taken about a generous pinch of beautiful saffron and put it in about, I would say about 1/4 of a cup of hot water. And I just let it sit here and get this beautiful orange color. And this is going to be added to the lamb once it's been browned and it's ready to start to simmer. So we'll need that a little bit later. So for spices, we're using a really great blend of Moroccan spices, or spices you would find in Moroccan mixes. I mean, these spices can be found all over the world, but they're really traditional in tagines and particularly this recipe, which brings out a lot of smokiness and color and flavor. So I say don't skip any of them. So what we've got here is turmeric and chili powder. So the turmeric is going to also add that yellow color, just like the saffron, but a little bit more of an orange. It's also going to give a certain type of flavor that turmeric gives to anything else that you cook with. And then we've got the chili powder to give it some kick. I like to use at least 1.5 teaspoons, but you can do less or you can do more depending on whether your family likes that flavor or not. I'm also using Himalayan pink salt, but you can use sea salt instead. I just tend to have lots of Himalayan pink salt, so that's what I'm using, but sea salt is fine. Freshly ground black pepper. And then what's really going to add the smokiness is the cumin. I love cumin in my cooking, and I'm using a lot more of it lately, but I realize that a lot of spice mixes that you find in the stores, like a Lebanese spice mix or a boharat, which is a 7-spice mix that you find in the Middle East, they're often cumin heavy, and it's because it does impart a darker color and to the dish, but it also gives it this smokiness that's really just very noticeable, and people tend to love it. And I also have some smoked paprika in here. I'm not using any hot paprika because I have the chili powder, and then some ground ginger. If you have fresh ginger, that's fine too, but I think the ground is just fine because we're actually blending all the spices together and using it all at once. So it tends to be just fine. Now you can use, to sweeten up the eggplant and the tomato, which are going to be cooked separately from the meat in this dish, you can use cane sugar or honey. And I'll do that at the end and show you, but if you want to just keep it all savory and not sweet, you can just take the honey or the sugar out of it. But that does make it very Moroccan to have the savory and sweet flavors going on. And also to add a little bit of tartness. And that means that we'll be using fresh lemon squeezed onto the cooked eggplant and tomato at the very end, which is really something special, and try not to skip that step because it is delicious. All right, so what I've done is I've already started the recipe so that I could show you how it begins and why it's really important to not skip this step, because you want to have smokiness in this dish. So I have baked tomatoes, garlic, and eggplant ahead of time to show you what we're going to do with it. So to start this dish, we have to cut up this eggplant into cubes, and then we salt it and put some olive oil on it and bake it in the oven for about 40 minutes. And it just gets this nice softness and smoky flavor to it, or smoky. And we're just going to add it to a bowl because I'm going to show you what we're going to do to it in a minute. So parchment paper is really, really useful in the kitchen because then you don't mess up all your pans and have a hard time cleaning everything. So I tend to use it a lot. And sometimes if you're cooking something else right away, you can just reuse the paper. So I've also done that with the tomatoes. And wow, the flavors and the smells are amazing in the kitchen when you're doing this. So what I've done is cut up the tomatoes as well, cube them, salt and olive oil, and the garlic is also here. So I'm just going to, it's a little bit stickier, so they're not going to come off as easy as the eggplant. So you may need to help it along a little bit. Just gonna sort of scrape it off. Oh, it smells so good. It's almost like pizza or something. That's what, that's why everybody loves pizza, because of the aroma of the tomatoes and the garlic and olive oil. That combination is just fantastic. Okay, so this is gonna go into the bowl. And that's it, we're almost done. Now what we're gonna do here is I'm gonna use the potato masher to just sort of mash all this goodness up. And then we're gonna add a little bit of our spices here. And then we're just gonna set this aside. So we're gonna add the paprika, the cumin, and some cilantro and parsley to this. Okay, so just mashing it. It doesn't have to be perfect. You don't have to put this in a blender and get it, completely mashed up. Let's just stick it up here. It's always fun to get this off. Okay, so now we're gonna take some of the parsley and cilantro, about, just a small handful of each, and just give it a chop. Again, I think this should be finer rather than rough, just because we are going to actually taste this in the tomato and eggplant, and we don't want big chunks of it. So we want it to be nicely blended in. And this is all going to cook at the end. Once the meat has been cooking and we're almost ready to serve this, we're gonna cook this back up in some olive oil and add our honey or sugar and then our lemon juice. So here goes the cilantro and parsley, and our cumin, paprika, and ginger is going in here. So I'm just going to scrape all this off. And all right, so now that I have everything in here, all I'm gonna do is just sort of blend it all, nothing perfect. This is going to get sauteed later. Okay, so we wanna just let them sort of sit in here, get to know each other until our meat has cooked a while. Okay, so let's set that to the side. Okay, so now it's time to cook the meat. You can use beef, you can use chicken in this recipe, but I really, really prefer the flavor of lamb. It just goes really well with eggplant, and so I think that sort of marriage of the meat, lamb and eggplant is just a great combination. But certainly experiment and try with what you like. Now we're going to use a little bit of olive oil and onion, and get our Dutch oven nice and hot. We don't want to burn the olive oil ever, ever, ever. And we're not using extra virgin, we're using just regular olive oil. And it's going to be, we're not going to sear it, we're not going to burn it, we're going to gently, gently heat it. So your heat should be on low, medium, so not high at all. Okay. Now, when we're using the Dutch oven, we are slow cooking the meat after we get the meat nice and brown. Now, if you wanted to use a tagine, you could achieve something very, very similar, although you're not going to be technically sauteing or frying anything in the tagine. But what's really beautiful about the tagine is that tagines have been made to braise meat naturally. So the conical shape here and cooking the meat inside of it is actually what keeps it steamed and gets the meat really nice and soft. We can achieve a similar result using a Dutch oven. The only difference is in tagines, typically people took these to, and they still do in Morocco, take these to communal ovens where they are closed and really not open during the cooking process. So that's fine because most of the meat is getting steamed for hours. And so this recipe is typically, if you're going to use like 2 to 3 pounds of meat, you could cook this for 2 to 3 hours and just sort of let it slow cook for a long time. We're sort of speeding it up a little bit by using the Dutch oven just because I'm going to be able to raise the heat when the meat is inside and brown it and then bring it down to a simmer, and then we're still going to steam it inside and let it slow cook and fall off the bone and all of that, but it's just a different way of using the same methods that are used in the tagine. Okay, so once the oil is nice and warm, I'm going to add the onion and let that, we're going to cook the onion until it's translucent. And that takes about 2 to 3 minutes. The meat, the turmeric, and the chili powder, and the salt and pepper. And so from there, we are going to let it brown on both sides and add a little bit of water once the meat has been browned. And the water we're going to use is this saffron infused water. While the onions are browning, I'm going to cut up a little bit more cilantro and parsley because it's going to go right into the meat as well. Once we've browned it and we've added some water and the saffron water, then this will cook along with the liquids, and once we close the top on the meat, and it's just going to really give it some more aroma, some more freshness that only these fresh herbs can give. You want to chop them really, really fine. Nobody wants really big bits of herbs in their food. Okay, so I think our onions are pretty good. I can tell by the sound. You don't want them to be too browned or anything, just translucent, which means that you can see right through it. Okay? So our meat, one thing about the meat is that I want to make sure that whenever I'm cooking with meat, that the meat is dry. If it's wet at any time, it's going to steam, and I don't want that. I want to achieve a browning on both sides. So just get some paper towels handy every time you're making anything with meat and make sure it's nice and patted down. And this is looking really good already. So I'm just going to add it right into the bottom. And if you have more boniness on one side, then just add the bones face down. So that way you get the bones sticking to the pan rather than the meat fibers, which tends to tear and all of that if you turn it too soon. So you don't want to do that. Okay, so now I'm also going to add the turmeric and the chili powder, and that's already giving it a really nice color. I'm adding the salt and pepper. And I give it a whirl. So I can smell the turmeric. It's so lovely. Now what I want to make sure I'm doing here is coating the meat with all of the spice and the onions, but I'm not going to burn anything. So you want to make sure that the heat is a little bit medium low, not too high. And then once you've achieved a nice browning, I'm going to add a cup of water and the saffron water. So got a little oil there. I'm just going to add a cup of water because I don't want this to be too watery like a stew. It's going to mix with the eggplant and tomato to make a tagine that can be served over couscous or eaten with bread. So that's what you really want to achieve here. Now, adding the water actually helps you scrape up any bits on the bottom, okay? And now it's time to add the saffron water. This is my favorite part. Just smell it before you put it in. It's just so lovely and fragrant. This is what sets the dish apart from anything else. Okay, so now we're going to sort of raise it or turn it to low and let it simmer and put the top on it. Now, if I were doing this in the tagine, I would have actually just added all the meat, all the spices, the cilantro and parsley right in here, and the water and the saffron water, and I would put this in the oven and let it cook for about 2 hours on 350. So you can still do that if you have a tagine that is made for cooking. Some of them are decorative, but make sure you get one for cooking if you do that. We also have the parsley and cilantro here, so I'm just going to add this into the pot and let it do its thing. Give it a whirl. Beautiful. Okay, so now I think what we can do is cook the eggplant and the tomato. And this is really just a basic saute. So I'm using olive oil, my sugar, which is either honey or any type of cane sugar, and lemon juice at the end. So I'm just going to heat the saute pan. Again, we're cooking with olive oil, so we don't want to burn the oil. We want to just do a medium to low heat, about 1 to 2 tablespoons of oil. And we've already got our mixture here, so I'm just going to make sure that the spices are nicely blended in here. It smells really, really good. It's sort of a sweet and sour type of flavor, but it's going to taste fantastic on this meat. And these are for later, so we're gonna hold on to this. And I'm really just using a citrus press so I don't need to put this lemon juice into a bowl or a cup. I'm just gonna squeeze this right into the pan. So make sure the pan is completely coated with oil and just add this all in. Okay, so this beautiful eggplant and tomato that's been roasted in the oven for about 40 minutes. And I did this before I even started the meat, but you can do this while the meat is cooking because the meat needs to cook for about 45 minutes to an hour if you're doing about a pound. If you're doing more, you kind of need to at least almost double that. Okay, so this is gonna get nice and oiled up. I'm not really trying to saute anything for any more browning. I'm just trying to coat it with the oil and give it that lovely flavor that only olive oil can give, and also to warm it up. So once it's all been thoroughly heated, that's when I'm going to add my honey or my sugar. And just a little bit. I don't want too much, but I definitely want a tiny bit of sweetness here. I'm just going to use about a teaspoon of honey. And let that sort of melt in. Smells wonderful. And then I'm going to squeeze my juice right into the pan. And in less than 5 minutes, I've warmed this up, got everything combined, and I'm done. And I'm just gonna leave this here, keep it warm on the pan. So when everything is finished, I'll serve the meat with the tomato and eggplant mixture and serve it over couscous.